I want to welcome everyone, and I especially want to thank our sponsors for this evening's program. That is Dennis and Margaret Hawk O'Brien. We sure appreciate them helping us out with this. And I thought it would be fun, since it's December, to highlight some of the items we have that reflect the holidays. So, of course, we need to start with one of the things we have that was generated or produced by the man who's responsible for the penultimate holiday flower. Joel Roberts Poinsett was born on March 2nd, 1779 in Charleston. And he was the son of a Huguenot physician by the name of Elijah Poinsett. And Joel's mother was from England. Her name was Anne Roberts. As a child, Poinsett spent 6 years in England. And apparently, when he began his formal education there, he excelled at languages. Once he graduated, though, he couldn't quite find a profession that interested him. He tried a year of medical school in Scotland, and then he returned to Charleston to study law, but he left that after a year as well. So in 1801, when he was about 22 years old, Poinsett set out for Europe. He spent several years traveling across the continent, and apparently his fluency in foreign languages helped him win audiences with several powerful European leaders, including Napoleon I and Tsar Alexander I of Russia. Poinsett returned home in 1808, and right about that time, as I'm sure you know, tensions were mounting between Britain and the United States, who were headed for another war. Poinsett hoped to get a military appointment, but instead in 1810, he was named the U.S. Trade Envoy to South America. After 4 years in that role, he returned to South Carolina and was elected to the General Assembly, where he became a strong proponent of internal improvements. In 1819, Joel Poinsett became president of the South Carolina Board of Public Works, where he supervised the construction of canals and roads that linked Charleston with the interior. In 1821, he won a seat in Congress, where he served until 1825. As a congressman, he opposed tariff increases, supported expansion of the military, and favored recognition of South American republics. Now, when he left Congress in 1825, President Monroe appointed him the first U.S. ambassador to Mexico. Now, Britain's influence was very strong in Mexico at the time, and Poinsett urged the Mexicans to be independent from Britain and any other European countries. During this time, he also tried unsuccessfully to purchase Texas for the United States, and that didn't win him any particular friends in Mexico. He was also unsuccessful in obtaining a commercial treaty, but he did take some steps to increase trade between the U.S. and Mexico. However, his meddling in local politics made him unpopular in Mexico, especially among the British traders there and the country's monarchist. Eventually, the Mexican government requested his recall, and Poinsett left the country in January 1830. As a strong Unionist, Poinsett opposed South Carolina's nullifiers and supported President Andrew Jackson. This set him up against John C. Calhoun, of course, and that would have lessened his political influence in the state. In 1833, though, and this would have been just 3 years after he left Mexico, he married Mary Izard Pringle, a widow. She had one son, but the Poinsetts had no children. Poinsett was a nationally known figure by this time, and in 1837, President Van Buren appointed him Secretary of War. In that role, he worked to raise the professional standards of the Army by sending officers to train over in Europe. As a proponent of Western expansion, he also oversaw the removal of about 40,000 Native Americans. He served as Secretary of War until 1841. After that, Poinsett returned to South Carolina and split his time between a farm in the Greenville district and his wife's plantation near Georgetown. He spoke out in favor of education, economic improvements, and the need to end the South's dependence on slavery. In 1844, Poinsett became president of the National Institute, a forerunner of the Smithsonian. In 1851, he died while traveling from his farm in Greenville, and he is buried in the cemetery of the Church of the Holy Cross in Stateburg. Now, we all know the reason we're talking about him tonight is that Poinsett is most remembered for his interest in botany and the fact that he introduced a red leaf plant from Mexico to North America. The plant is native to Central America and flourished in southern Mexico. The Aztecs used to use it as a dye, and they also used the milky colored sap to make a medicine to treat fevers. Poinsett had hothouses on his property near Greenville. When he visited the southern area of Mexico in 1828, he was enchanted by these plants and sent some back to South Carolina. He propagated them and he sent more to his friends who were interested in botany, among them John Bartram of Philadelphia. Mr. Bartram, in turn, gave the plant to one of his friends who was a nurseryman who sold them. The plant began to be called the poinsettia around 1836 in recognition of Joel Poinsett. And in 2002, Congress declared December 12th National Poinsettia Day, as that's the day Poinsett died in 1851. It was on December 12th. The National Poinsettia Day was established to honor him, but also to honor Paul Eck Jr., the California nurseryman who actually discovered a technique that allows the seedlings to branch and makes them a wonderful plant for pots. It may also interest you to know that the poinsettia has been used in Mexican Christmas celebrations since the 17th century, and the name for the plant there can be translated into flower of the holy night. So, we have several items by Joel Poinsett, and this is just one of them. This one is a letter to Mary Izard Pringle, who was his step-granddaughter. It's dated April 24th, 1849, and so it was written when Joel Poinsett was 70 years old. He writes that he's sending her a drawing because he promised her he'd do that, and he says promises must always be kept if possible. And he said, I think you can gather from the letter that it must be a drawing of her, because he says he has nearly forgotten how young girls look, especially Mary, who has bright eyes and her cheeks tinged with health. He mentions they are looking forward to seeing her on the following Saturday and says, Grandmama sends a kiss to each and every one of her dear grandchildren, and I am, my dear Mary, your affectionate grandfather. So that's our first item. I'm going to come back for a minute to be in person because we're going on to the Civil War. And before I go back to the slideshow, I want to share this book with you. We are going to look at a letter from Augustine Thomas Smythe, but you need to know that almost all of his Civil War letters, can you all see this? Everybody's saying, turn it around. Thank you. Almost all of his Civil War letters have been edited, and they're in this wonderful book. That's the editors are Eric Emerson from our state archives and Karen Stokes, who is our very own processing archivist. Title of the book is Days of Destruction, and you, if you live in Charleston, can get it from our gift shop. So, on to the letter. The letter we're going to read is from Augustine Thomas Smythe, or Gus as he was called, to his mother. And it was written on the 25th of December, 1864. So I thought very appropriate for our presentation tonight. Now you see here we have a portrait of them both, and I did want to add a note that the E at the end of Gus's name is not a typo, because his mother does not have one. That was something Gus added later in his life. Now, before we get to the letter, as always, I want to give you a little background on Gus. He was born in Charleston in 1842 to a family of Scots-Irish descent. His father was a Presbyterian minister from Ireland named Thomas Smythe, and his mother was Margaret Milligan Adger, the daughter of James Adger, a prominent Charleston merchant. Gus was the second oldest son of their 6 living children. After attending a boys' school in Charleston, he went to South Carolina College in Columbia. Right after the state seceded from the Union, Gus joined the college's Corps of Cadets. He served with them until the unit disbanded in the fall of 1861. At that time, he enlisted in the Washington Light Infantry, which in turn became Company A of the 25th South Carolina Infantry. His first battle was the Battle of Secessionville in June 1862, and it deeply affected him. He wrote home, "Just back from such a scene of blood as I trust never again to behold." 4 months later, he was detached from the Washington Light Infantry to serve in the Confederate Signal Corps. He was later promoted to the rank of Lance Sergeant. This position allowed him to serve in Charleston, mostly around the harbor, which was really close to his parents' home. Gus had grown up there, and it was located at 12 Meeting Street. Now, the headquarters for the Signal Corps was a bathing house that jutted into the Ashley River along White Point Garden. During the late winter and spring of 1863, Gus was stationed aboard the ironclad Palmetto State, which protected the harbor. After that, for a brief time, he was a signalman at Fort Sumter, and then after that, he was transferred to the steeple of St. Michael's Church. There he was extremely close to home, so he could keep an eye on his family's property, as they all were civilians and they had evacuated the city. Night after night, he was perched in that steeple looking for Union signals. His letters reveal that he was very skilled at intercepting and deciphering the messages. You can also hear in the tone of his letters that he began to grow anxious and depressed as bombardment continued. That, along with the scavengers and thieves who roamed the city, caused him a great deal of concern. By September 1864, Gus noted that casualties from the bombardment were mounting at a rate of 2 or 3 per day. Now, during the period that he was stationed at St. Michael's, Gus became engaged to Louise Rebecca McCord, who he had met at South Carolina College before the war. That happened in February 1864, although the wedding didn't take place until the war was over. So the letter we're going to look at is from the Augustine Thomas Smythe papers. Susan Smythe Bennett, his daughter, gave them to us. And it's one of many letters he wrote to relatives who had evacuated the city. So as you see, the letter was dated December 25th, 1864. Gus at this time is 22 years old. Christmas night, Mother, but oh, how different from what it used to be. This has been a sad, lonely day for me. I could not but recall the past days of joyous festivity and compare them with my Christmas. As I passed number 36 this morning, and by the way, number 36 was his uncle's home. He continues, as I passed, I had to stop and feel how changed it was, so desolate and lonely, riddled by shells and threatened by the enemy, from the old times when Christmas found it filled with good cheer and crowded with smiling faces and happy hearts, now separated a far distance from each other. How soon will it be ere we can once more assemble together? I was on duty all last night alone, the third in succession that I have spent thus in the steeple, and also all morning until 3 o'clock. Then I came home to dinner, not exactly like Aunt Jamie's Christmas dinner, by myself, and as it was raining hard and I could not go to church, I sat here by the fire and thought of you at home and wished I could be with you all. How many times have I wished that wish today? Then I went down to the bathing house to hear the news and chat a while, and determined to have a good supper at any rate in honor of the day. My bill of fare for dinner was cold beef, rice, and potatoes. I brought a friend up with me, and we have just finished a hearty supper of sausages, eggs, bread, and butter, and a cup of coffee, which he furnished, as I had none parched. We cooked it ourselves here at the grate. And then Gus goes on to speak of his servant, an enslaved man named Philip. Philip asked leave to spend Christmas with his children, and as he has served me well, I let him go yesterday to return Tuesday morning. A boy from Middleton's cooks my breakfast and dinner till he returns. This accounts for my dinner today. The box came splendidly and was a most acceptable Christmas present. Then he turns back to the war. Savannah has gone. Now we are planning to try and rescue Charleston from the same fate, as she is in much danger. God grant us his aid now. There is no sign yet of this city being given up, but it is well to be prepared, and we must fight hard and retain it. And where are the troops? These reserves and militia are not worth a fig. I am not giving up yet, though. Our turn will come presently. The Yankees have had a pretty long run of luck. Perhaps, very probably, I overrate our danger. Provisions can hardly be bought here now, and it is going to be worse soon. Nothing in the shape of provisions is allowed to leave the city. It is very late, nearly 12 o'clock, and my light dim. Good night. Love to all the dear ones, Sue, Annie, Sis, Father, Adger, Ellen, and all. Ever, Mother, your boy, Augustine. Less than 2 months after he wrote this, in February 1865, Confederate troops abandoned Charleston, and Gus joined the South Carolina Cavalry. He participated in battles in North Carolina, and at the end of the war, he returned home. In June 1865, he married Lou. His wife's mother gave the couple Lang Syne Plantation, as well as nearby Goshen Plantation, for $5. But Gus wasn't meant to be a planter. After a year, he returned to Charleston and studied law. He was a very successful attorney and had many profitable business interests. He served in the state senate from 1880 to 1894, and he was also a trustee of several colleges. His biography notes that he served in leadership positions in a number of state organizations, including the South Carolina Historical Society. Gus passed away in 1873. And we can assume that he had many more enjoyable holidays than the one he described in that letter. But I'm certain that he frequently recalled that lonely Christmas during the war. So that's our Civil War item. And keeping with that military trend, we are going to jump about 54 years ahead to the First World War. And this next item comes from a gentleman named George M. Dillingham. Now, we don't know as much about Dillingham as we do about Gus Smythe. We do know he was born in Charleston in 1892. His full name was George Moffett Dillingham, and he studied to be an engineer. In World War I, he served in the 306th Engineer Regiment of the Army's 81st Division, and he was eventually made a captain. Now, the 81st Division was made up of men from Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and was organized at Camp Jackson near Columbia, as you know, in September 1917. Dillingham would have been about 25 years old at that time. It was one of the first National Army divisions to be organized, and they were called the Wildcat Division. In May 1918, the division was sent to Camp Sevier near Greenville, and in July, it was sent to New York to ship overseas. By August, the men were in England, and then in October, in the fall, they were in France. The next month, the division was sent to the front line. After the war, they remained in France for more than 5 months before being sent back to the U.S. in early June 1919. The George M. Dillingham papers contain professional, genealogical, and military information, and this is a typescript memoir, which is titled Christmas at Nod Sur Seine. I'm sorry, you have to excuse my French, literally. And I'm just going to let this item speak for itself and read the first part of it to you. I won't read the whole thing, but I just love this. So he starts out saying, 2 companies of the regiment were billeted at Nod-sur-Seine, a small French village with a normal population of 150. The other companies were located in villages several miles distant. We had completed in mid-December 1918 a 16-day hike back from the front between Saint-Mihiel and Verdun. As Christmas approached, preparations for a celebration were started by our very efficient Y girl, Miss Hiller. The Commune Council was persuaded to donate a Christmas tree, a wee small thing about 4 feet tall. Cutting of a larger tree would have been to the French an unpardonable sacrilege. The recreation hut, which we called the shack, was a knockdown type of temporary barrack. It was festooned with paper garlands and such. The regimental band was booked for a visit to Nod's on Christmas Eve. Arrangements were made to have the regimental chaplain, a portly and genial soul, greatly admired by all the soldiers, appear at the Christmas tree in his Santa Claus outfit. He was to distribute the gifts to the children of the village. The town crier broadcasted on his route our invitation to every person to join us at the shack for the celebration. All eagerly accepted. The company funds of both companies were full as never before. Due to the shortage of coins of all denominations and of small franc paper notes, it had been impossible on payday to give each soldier the exact amount of his pay. The small denomination surplus was credited to each man in a ledger. The totals were put in the company funds. These credits mounted up to about $200. The men approved a suggestion that these monies be devoted to the purchase of presents for the children of the village. It was decided that the list of the children attending the school would be the basis for the gift presentation. The schoolmaster made up the list. It totaled 40. A visit was made to a nearby city to get the gifts. Fortunately, a toy shop which had been closed for 4 years was glad to sell splendid toys at very reasonable prices. These toys were as bright and clean as if brand new. At an average cost of $5 per toy, we got beautiful and substantial items. The schoolmaster and his wife made a designation of the toys, child by child, and wrapped and name marked each present. On Christmas evening, long before festivities started, the villagers, men, women, and children, and the soldiers began to assemble at our shack. The band's arrival evoked shouts of joy. Ooh, la musique! Ooh la la, la musique! The mood was happy and festive. Here came the mayor and council members, bringing the wine, which was their contribution. The Christmas tree was ready, decorated with presents at its base. But no chaplain, no Santa Claus. By telephoning to headquarters, it was learned that the chaplain had been unavoidably detained. The major commanding our battalion acted quickly. I was summoned to him. He ordered me to be Santa Claus. I was glad to act, but delighted that there was no Santa Claus rig for me to put on. The band sounded off splendidly. The council's wine was doing a good job. Villagers and soldiers were ecstatic. At a pause in the band's music, I had a bugler sound attention. Then I announced that the presents would be passed out. Fortunately, my French was good enough for each child to recognize his or her name, as I called them. François Clerget, Jean Bouchal, Pierre Longchamp, Marie Porcher, and on and on. These children had never had real toys. 4 years of war had deprived them of playthings. To see the radiant joy in each face as the boy or girl received their present, this sight repeated many times. This was to me a happiness I shall never forget. Children and parents were overwhelmingly grateful. Tears flowed freely. We had 2 pounds of foil-wrapped chocolate creams. These were passed out, 1 to each child, and the surplus given 1 to each of the aged villagers. They had forgotten what candy looked or tasted like. Not a piece was unwrapped and eaten. All pieces were taken home to be enjoyed bit by bit over a long period. Then the band took over. The musicians were at their best. The French were enthralled and vocal in their appreciation. And I'm going to stop there, but he goes on to talk about how every time he went back into the village, all the children would run up to him, and even the parents, and express their gratitude. So it's just a really sweet story. These two postcards were also included in the Dillingham papers, and they were postcards of Nasser Sen that he sent home while he was stationed there. So it gives you some sort of idea about what it was like when he was there during World War I. So that's our second military item. And once again, keeping with that theme, we're going to go to the holidays during the next big war, World War II. And the next item belongs to, coincidentally, A.T.S. Stoney. And it just happens that the A.T.S. in his name stands for Augustine Thomas Smythe. So yes, A.T.S. Stoney was the grandson of Gus Smythe that was stationed in St. Michael's Steeple during the Civil War. And like Gus, Stoney was born in Charleston. He was an illustrator and a cartographer, as well as a U.S. Army officer. Now, Stoney served in World War I in U.S. Army field artillery units in France and Germany. And after that war, he worked as a draftsman, a surveyor, a topographer, and a civil engineer for the Nevada Northern Railway, the Port Utilities Commission of Charleston, and the TVA, before returning to service once again in 1942 with the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was the son of Samuel Gilliard Stoney and Louisa Chevis Smythe, and Louisa would have been Gus's daughter. A.T.S. Stoney was married to Eliza Louisa Jenkins, the daughter of Edward Jenkins. So in World War II, Stoney served in the 61st Transport Group, which was later called the 61st Troop Carrier Group. According to the Army Museum website, that group flew C-47s, and in May 1943, they were sent to North Africa for training. Then they were tasked with dropping paratroopers into Sicily. In August 1943, they moved to Sicily to prepare for the invasion of Italy. In addition to dropping paratroopers, the group transported cargo and evacuated patients in the Mediterranean. In February 1944, they went to England to prepare for the Normandy invasion. Now, on D-Day, which you know was June 6, 1944, 18 planes from the 61st dropped paratroopers, and I'm quoting from the memoirs of one of the other men here. He says, "We dropped paratroopers right on top of the unsuspecting Germans on the Normandy Peninsula. All aircraft returned to base except one, which made an emergency landing in southern England," end quote. Later that year, in September, the division dropped British paratroopers in the air attack on Holland. By March 1945, they moved to France for the airborne assault across the Rhine, dropping paratroopers into Germany. They also, at the same time, provided transport services in the European theater, hauling gasoline, ammunition, food, medicine, and other supplies, as well as evacuating wounded soldiers. In May 1945, the group moved to Trinidad and was finally inactivated on July 31st of that year. So this card was I guess, I'm sure, provided to anyone who wanted to use them that belonged to the 61st during Christmas of 1944. So this would have been 6 months after D-Day, and they were stationed in Barkston, England. And you can see that it wishes everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and that individual members of the division could sign it, and he signed Major A.T.S. Stoney. So that brings us through to World War II. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and hopefully I can get this right side up this time. The next item I'm going to talk about is from our pamphlet collection. See the front and the back. And Pamphlets, when I heard it, I thought that can't be very interesting. Y'all, this is the most fabulous collection. Hats off to Molly here, because Molly catalogs and keeps up with our pamphlet collection. These pamphlets date back to the 1700s. They contain speeches, obituaries, the history of all these early organizations, wonderful images. I could spend a year going just through the pamphlets. I love them. Anyway, this particular pamphlet is commemorating something that happened exactly 70 years ago today. And that is the dedication of the Bicentennial Tabernacle of Kahal Kodash Beth Elom, or KKBE Synagogue in Charleston. So I'm going to show you the slide with it on there now. Well, let's look at the temple first. For those of you who don't know, KKBE was founded in 1749, and it's one of the oldest Jewish congregations in America. Their temple is the oldest in the nation that has been continually used for Jewish worship, and is also known as the birthplace of American Reform Judaism. The synagogue was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1980. Now, as I said, I was going to show you, there's the front and the interior of the pamphlet. On the back, it gives a description of the two tabernacles. You can see, if you look to the left on your screen, the old tabernacle's in the upper corner, and then the bicentennial one is down on the bottom of the page. The description says that the old tabernacle was erected in 1838 as a temporary house of worship for the congregation, while a new temple was being finished to replace the synagogue that burned in 1838. The second Jewish Sunday school in the entire U.S. was started in that old tabernacle, and many generations of children were taught there. It also served as a meeting place for a number of organizations of the Charleston Jewish community, including the Hebrew Benevolent Society, the Hebrew Orphan Society, and the Council of Jewish Women. After 110 years, it became apparent that the old tabernacle couldn't serve the needs of the congregation, and it was torn down in 1948. The Bicentennial Tabernacle was finished in 1949. And this service was held to dedicated on the last day of Hanukkah in 1950, which also commemorated the bicentennial anniversary of KKBE. So I thought that was pretty cool, that it was a really big deal here in Charleston exactly 70 years ago today. So this presentation, well, I thought it had been a little faster than most, but maybe it hasn't. So I know that we've been through 5 items, but I couldn't resist to give you a little extra holiday bonus here. So we're going to look real quickly at 2 others from the collection. The first is a recipe for eggnog from the Dees family. Now that family originally came from South Carolina from Scotland and established themselves as successful merchants and planters. If you've heard my talk on golf, you know that it was a branch of the Dees family that has the first record of the shipment of golf clubs coming into North America. This particular recipe was donated to the society in 1962 by Colonel Alston Dees, and it's believed to be from 1850 and was written by Dr. Seaman Dees. Here are the instructions in case you cannot make them out and you have a yearning to go make yourself some eggnog. To 1 gallon of milk, take 3 dozen eggs. Break the yolks in a pan and the whites in a large dish. The yolks to be beaten well with as much sugar as judged sufficient. Now there's an asterisk there, and below it says about 1 tablespoon of powdered sugar to each egg. Then it goes on to say, when light, pour slowly 4 tumblers of brandy, in parentheses it says stirring fast meanwhile. Add the milk slowly and grate a nutmeg in. Beat the whites to a stiff froth and put on top. Then he adds, a tablespoon of peach brandy is an improvement. So to those 4 tumblers of regular brandy, Mr. D, our Dr. D says add a tablespoon of peach brandy, and I'm sure you had a wonderful eggnog there. On the right side of the screen, you see a painting of a poinsettia. This is from the first of 7 journals that we have that belong to John Henry Dick. These large leather-bound journals contain notes, hand-painted maps, and artwork inspired by John Henry's travels and the natural world around his home, Dixie Plantation. If you haven't seen them, his bird drawings are absolutely beautiful. Anyway, the poinsettia is John Henry's entry in the first journal, and it was made on Christmas Day, 1950, so again, 70 years ago. And I thought it was a good way to bring us full circle to our first item, the letter that highlighted the life of Joel Poinsett. Plus, I just think he did a great job drawing that poinsettia. I just think it's so pretty. Okay, did we have any questions? Let me get, Virginia's going to take care of my questions for me.
So, Alex asked, I like how this letter included a mention about a slave. I would imagine that many of these type letters do not. Is that true? I would say it's about maybe half and half. I mean, I can't give an exact number, but there's definitely other letters that include people writing about their enslaved and the day-to-day activities and whether they were leaving or coming and going.
We have a lot that talk about when a particularly favorite enslaved person would pass away. Like I know Henry Lawrence talks about he doesn't know what he's going to do without the one individual that helped him so much in planting rice. So yeah, probably 50% is a good estimate here.
You also asked when Augustine T. Smythe died. He died in 1914. So he did live through the American Civil War. Faye, he also asked, why did you pick this letter?
Oh, it just touched me. I think anybody who, I remember reading this actually when my youngest son was in South Korea and not home at Christmas. And I thought, I was so upset that he was in South Korea, but I thought, oh my gosh, can you imagine if he had been in the steeple of St. Michael's under a bombardment? So it just, I think anybody who had anyone go through a war and know what it was like, that it just, I thought it was very touching, and it serves us well to remember to be grateful for what we have on Christmases, even if we can't see everybody. Any others? Nope. Anybody have any other questions or comments? You can unmute yourselves.
I'm curious. I'm Melinda Sommer.
Yeah.
And hey, I enjoyed this. Going back to the question of the slave, is there any reason was there any notation as to where the slave went to be with his family? Was his family free? Was his wife free or his children free, and he was allowed to go and visit with them?
There's nothing, I think it's one of those things that he's writing to his mother and just assumes she knows all those things.
Okay.
Now it's a real good question, Melinda, if you went back through those letters, what parts of Philip, the enslaved man's life, you could put together. And that would be a really neat project, actually.
Yeah.
From those letters.
I'm kind of searching for something right now like that. We're not sure what happened to this fella. Yeah. We think he was freed in 1864, but we're not sure what happened to him afterwards. And so we're just trying to find out some information. When I say we, family and stuff. So I was just curious if there was any records that mentions, like, is there a section of not Columbia, Charleston, where we would find a lot of these free blacks during that time period living, and whose families or who had members that were enslaved that were able to join them?
I don't know. I know there was a good, there was a sizable population of
Right.
blacks
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
South Carolina, and I assume, yeah, they would have had family members who were still.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
It's just an assumption, though.
Oh,
Yeah.
heaven forbid. That's what we always are doing. We're assuming based on the evidence we have here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Faye,
Yes.
great report. Thank you so much. One observation for me is that I believe that the DEAS that you're pronouncing as D's is actually pronounced days, DAYS.
Okay. Well, see, I had a member of the family told me it was just like peas.
Well, all of the Days family that I've known for 75 years are pronouncing it DAYS, and
Okay.
the people that that brought the first golf clubs over, I think it was 1736. He was a member of the St. Andrew's Society,
Right.
and that's the way that was pronounced. But maybe I'm wrong.
No,
But
I'm sure you're right. Thank you.
no, but the people that own Boone Hall Plantation,
Mhm.
and there was the guy Henry Days. His name was Happy Days. So anyway,
So that was a way to remember. Good way to remember it.
right. Just
Thank you.
but thank you. That was
Good to know.
really interesting. Really appreciate it.
Sounds like good eggnog too.
Outstanding. Yes. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, this is Lisa Faye. My picture says Madeline Carranza, but that's my daughter's name. I don't know how that's on here. But I had a question about Poinset's parents. They were both French Huguenots, and did they come from England or directly from France?
No, his father was a French Huguenot. His mother was English.
There's a lot.
I'm not sure, but that's a good question. I'm not sure. It sounded to me like his father came from France, but he could have been second generation.
Didn't a lot of the Huguenots flee to England and then come to the United States?
That's where they could have, met each other. So I'm not real familiar with the pre-Joel story, but yeah, I was trying to remember back what I read about him, and it just said, father was a French Huguenot, but that doesn't necessarily mean he.
What was his mother's name?
His mother named it with Anne Roberts, which is very English. Anybody else? Well, somebody asked if this was recorded, and yes, even with my upside down book, it is recorded and will be on YouTube and available as soon as we can get it up there. We're going to try to put all the focuses on there as well as some of our other presentations. So thank you again. We really appreciate everybody coming out for these. I think it's been a wonderful way to just keep us all connected. It's been fun for me. Long ago and far away, I was an archivist. So anytime I can go back and pretend that I'm still an archivist, it gives me great joy. So I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful holiday. And we are planning, I have to tell you, an extraordinary winter lecture series this year. When you are allowed to go virtual, it gives you some freedom. And one of our speakers is going to be from Oxford, England. So I'm very excited about it. So stay tuned, look for that announcement, and have a great holiday. See you all later. Be well.